Our guests today are Tom Campbell, Hillary Raimo, Marla Frees, and Laurie Huston. We're going to have a great day. Tom Campbell, as most of you know, retired large complex systems analyst for NASA, physicist and explorer of the larger consciousness system we call reality. Author of My Big Toe, A Big Theory of Everything, a trilogy of books that bring together the entirety of human experience under one seamless scientific understanding. Hillary Raimo. Hillary Raimo is a modern-day visionary, artist, healer, writer, and longtime advocate of revolutionary higher consciousness. Hillary has spent the last 10 years on the air as a radio talk show host. As a certified master healer in several healing modalities, Hillary is also the founder of the Love Breathe for Earth Global Meditations. Hillary specializes in teaching how to be an Earth Oracle, an in-depth transformational process to reconnect people with the frequency of the Earth. She has spent the last 25 years of her life traveling the world to connect with ancient and modern-day temples and studying vast arrays of religion, spirituality, patterns, and real-time global events. The author of 2 books, she also maintains a weekly blog called The Yin Factor. Hillary is a modern-day synchronistic and seeks to share the magic of living synchronistically. Marla Frees. Marla likes to call herself an ongoing student of consciousness. Marla's work is about how sharing consciousness survives death, mediating between the living and the dead, healing, harmony, and help. Marla assists others by hearing and seeing and feeling information pertaining to issues of the living and deceased. Laurie Huston. Laurie is an intuitive who's been on a spiritual path for over 20 years. Laurie has a Bachelor of Science degree in social work and neuro-linguistic programming and has studied over 30 different healing modalities before developing her own techniques for healing. Now, Tom, what does a physicist who has written A Big Toe, A Big Theory of Everything, have in common with these women who are intuitive, sensitives, and psychics?
Well, the answer to that would be the fact that I've written a big toe, and a big toe has to explain the paranormal as well as the normal, the metaphysical as well as the physical. So we actually have a lot in common. They are practitioners that, I kind of maybe shouldn't say that fall under, the big toe theory. They have done their own practice without any My Big Toe theory. That's not required. But my theory explains and puts in context many of the things they do and many of the experiences they have. And I've talked to Marla more than Hillary or Laurie about this meeting that we were having and what she hoped to get out of it. And she wanted to have the work that she does seem more legitimate, seem more like science, be able to talk about it and have others understand it as something that makes sense, not just the woo-woo, the stuff that, some people do and most people think that's ridiculous sort of thing. Then if you could incorporate a little science there, so explaining why this does work, how it works, and why it's just a natural part of the nature of reality that these ladies can do the things that they do. She thought that would be very helpful. So that was Marla's. Now, I haven't talked to Hillary or Laurie about exactly why they are involved and want to discuss this, but maybe that would be a good thing to do is ask each of them, what their interest is in talking to me and to each other. So, Hillary, put you on the spot first.
Thank you. Well, I guess your question is a good one. Why am I here? What did I want to talk to you about, Tom? Being a radio host for the last 10 years and now just getting ready to launch a new show on Capricorn Radio, I'm really starting to kind of look at all the past guests that I've had and the subject matter. And you, of course, have been on my show a couple times. We did a couple shows together over the last 10 years or so. And I think science is really coming into the forefront of everybody's mind with, you know, we've spent so much time doing exploring of consciousness and spirituality. And the New Age industry has really done a job of, you know, kind of stirring the masses, if you will. And science comes back into it, and I believe that we need a better understanding of it from a consciousness perspective. So I guess to answer your question, what I wanted to come here today to bring to the listeners and the viewers of this teleconference is a mixture of, you know, the scientific stuff with the metaphysical and, you know, the real time, what's really happening on the collective platform right now, as far as certain things go. My questions went along the line of CERN, the pentaquark discovery that they recently announced, and how that we may take that information and move it into a more relative construct for us to understand that also merges with it our spirituality, our higher abilities of being able to connect to people through consciousness, and how we're moving in towards a quantum consciousness leap. I think that science is really helping to prove that this is really where we're going. So my questions and my participation today have to do with those lines. So I'm excited to see what you have to say about all that.
Okay, good. Laurie?
Well, I'm always a little bit different. I mean, I love Tom because he can bring everything back to love. So we've done many, many shows, and we're starting back up again this month. So we are starting the last Tuesday of every month. So stay tuned for more shows on News for the Heart. And I guess with me, I mean, consciousness, it's so ever expansive. And what I deal with are maybe the more, the people that are trying to expand their consciousness, trying to evolve towards love, but they get stuck. And although we'll probably explore this more in 2 weeks, that was what I thought we'd look at, but I do really love Marla's question. And I think, you know, I love the idea of bringing science to everything, at least as a backup, a way to kind of justify it. Not really, I don't know that I need science to prove what we do, but just to sort of support it. And certainly there are different clients, especially the male population, that would rather have, you know, the scientific background and understanding of it than necessarily the heart-based. But since it all comes back to the heart and love, that's what I'm all about. So that's what I thought we would look at today. But, you know, depending on where we are, I certainly appreciate both people's questions, and certainly will pipe in when I can.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. And you've probably heard me say before that scientists are the new high priests of Western culture. And, you know, we have, you know, and I define that as the high priests of the people that tell everyone else what to believe. And these days, that's the scientists. So we have had people with skills and talents. We've had understanding. We've had people that understood consciousness and how it worked, you know, connections with with our planet, connections with a larger reality. All of this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years, but it's always stayed in the margins. It's off in the margin. It doesn't seem to ever get to be mainstream. And it's not going to get to be mainstream these days unless the scientists come on board and accept that as part of the larger reality, because they're the high priests of Western culture. And until they say that this is something that people should talk about, that it's something even talk aboutable, you know, with rational people, then unfortunately, all these things that you know, the five of us know are true, and we have our own experiences, will stay in the margins. and will be discounted by the majority of people as just, being nonsense. So I think that's really what science today, brings to these subjects, is that it as you said, Laurie, it supports, the work that you do. And I think that's important, because you can do more work, you can affect more people if you have that support. If you're not seen as, the strange lady who does weird things, and we don't know whether that's true or she's making it up, but as Laurie, the intuitive, who has, intuitive information and a bigger picture, and therefore can be helpful to you. You see, that's a different viewpoint, and you can help more people if the scientists, the high priests, say, yea, verily, this larger reality is indeed a fact. And suddenly then we all have traction that we didn't have before. So I really think that's the place of science in this. In the old days, where the high priests were religious, then you had to have religious bona fides before anybody would listen to what you were saying. If you weren't a cleric, then you really didn't know anything. So it's just the way our culture is today. And I think that's unfortunate that we've had all of these brilliant people and understandings and so on for thousands of years, and it never seems to get out of the margins. First, the high priests of religion didn't like it because it wasn't their religion, and then the high priests of science don't like it because it's not their religion either. So it's time for that to change, I think, and I believe science is coming up on that time. As Hillary points out, quantum physics is kind of pushing all of physics to that edge where they are going to have to see bigger pictures, or kind of retreat further down the rabbit hole of denial. They really don't have other choices. So that's why I'm here. I'm here because I think it's going to be fun. We're going to talk, and hopefully we're going to create some information that a lot of people, because this will go up on YouTube, and in a week 5,000 people will have seen it, and in a month 15 or 20,000 people will have seen it, and this helps people pull together these disparate parts of themselves. Part of them is the rational person who likes to be logical, and the other part of them is a intuitive person that maybe has spontaneous out of bodies or some other kinds of things, and they just can't get those two worlds together. It's the weird side of reality and the not weird side of reality, and they are afraid to talk to people about it because nobody understands, and they're not sure whether they're making it up or insane or not. And it's nice to give them some information so that they can see the bigger picture and how it all does fit together, and how it's not the weird side or the woo-woo side, but that woo-woo is actually science. It's got logic behind it. That makes a lot of difference to a lot of people, and that's sort of my point, is giving those people some information they can use.
So Hillary, I'd just like to give the audience that's going to be listening to this a little more of a background about you. You've recently stepped out into the world as artist and founder of Love, Breathe, Earth. Can you tell us something about these new endeavors, and just a little bit about how that's working with your work now?
Sure. Love, Breathe for Earth was founded last year. It was a beautiful story that came to be. It was a healing story. And my sister and I had a kind of come back together to do some spiritual work, and we had gone down to Cape Cod to do some meditation on the beach during a solar eclipse. And when we came off the beach, somebody had written the words love and breathe in the sand dune that we had to cross back over to get back to our car. And we just stood there and we said, wow, what a great message, love, breathe. So we stood there and we took pictures, of course, and we meditated on what that was. And we both went back to New York and after our trip together, and we thought this was a message. This was something that we had found together. And so her and I created the idea of doing global meditations based on gatherings where people could come together and practice their feelings of love, whatever that may be. So whatever your memories are of love, to conjure them up in the body as you sit out in nature and you work with nature. And the science behind that was pretty much what happens when you have PTSD. You have traumatic experiences that have happened to you, and you go into those sort of, you relive them, the body produces a chemistry, you have a whole domino effect that happens when you go into traumatic or abusive or painful memories. And I have a traditional background in psychology, and I have spent the last 25 years studying with Native Americans in the Southwest. I have gone into shamanic studies, different elements of that, and of course the radio. And going into Love Breathe for Earth was kind of a natural progression from that point, because it felt like it was an experiential hypothesis to my studies at Yale in 2013, when I went down to study and view the Voynich manuscript, which I had just been introduced to that year. And the Voynich manuscript is a manuscript that's housed in their Rare Book Manuscript Museum on the campus. I got special permission. I was working on an article for a magazine in Europe. I went down to go ahead and see the actual manuscript for a few hours, spend some time with it. And as a clairvoyant, as somebody who can touch things empathically and feel things, this was quite an extraordinary and very influential experience for me. Love Breathe for Earth was a natural progression after we had that experience on the mound at the beach after meditating together. And we decided to name it that because of our experience, and because the research that I had been doing on the Voynich manuscript, it was clear to me that there was a relationship with nature. And for those people who aren't familiar with what the Voynich manuscript is, it is a document that was discovered in the medieval centuries, and it is written in a language that cannot be deciphered. Yale's had many experts come in and take a look at it. They have determined it is a language, they just can't decipher it. But it is made up of these extraordinary images of nature and plants, star charts, women swimming in these green pools of liquid. It's quite a phenomenal piece of work. And so what I got out of it intuitively was there was this relationship between nature that humanity has naturally. It's ingrained in their biology. And as we pursue the nurturing of that relationship with nature, we increase a chemical output that actually influences the plants around us. And it's an extraordinary scientific connection. So Love Breathe for Earth became an experiential hypothesis of the work that I had done with the Voynich manuscript. I was going to write a book, but I decided instead that I would spend some time doing these gatherings and getting people's feedback and seeing what they experienced, and it really took off a lot bigger than I was expecting. I really had no expectations, but the Dalai Lama got involved with the first one, and he gave us our blessing for our first gathering May 18th of last year. And since then we've had 12 gatherings, and the feedback from people has been really quite humbling and profound. And as people go out into nature and meditate on their happy memories, their love memories, they begin to have an interesting kind of relationship with the natural world around them. And kids have been doing it, adults have been doing it. They all find their own way to express it. So Love Breathe for Earth became a movement, if you will, of people going out and practicing to create or nurture a spiritual relationship with nature. So what I did was I started to put a call out for people who were participating to let me know where they were participating from. And I took the locations from each person who gave me that information, and I put it on a big world map. And for each meditation, I created a grid, and I started to put them onto these big wall canvases, 7, 8 feet, 9 feet big. And I would paint the love grid that was created for each gathering. So I'm putting together a show for the 12 canvases that represent these love grids that we've put out in the world for the last year as part of my personal work with the Voynich manuscript, and also to, just create something beautiful in the world. So that's how that all progressed. Does that answer your question?
That is pretty amazing. That's fascinating. Is this Love Breathe for Earth, getting in touch with the earth, our intent and our influence on it? Because it's bringing to mind, as Thomas said before, you can comment on this, Tom, we can have an influence, a positive influence on the events that people predict. For instance, the Cascadian earthquake that's overdue for 240 years. The physicist Michio Kaku says these reports are not overstated, that it still could, Tom, Love Breathe for Earth, is that something that could help these predictions not come true?
Oh, of course. I mean, our intent modifies future probability. And when that's a loving and caring intent, then that helps modify future probability toward loving and caring expressions. So yes, we and nature and the planet and in the solar system and actually the entire universe are really all connected. And all of the consciousness that has nothing to do with our universe, we're all connected to that too. So everything is connected, and what one does affects all. So surely we have lots and lots of people sitting down or standing up or whatever and feeling love, thinking about their happy thoughts, getting into positive thinking, particularly in a surrounding that supports that. Because when you're out in nature, there's nobody, handing you a cell phone. There's nobody telling you to come over here and look at this. You're in a place where you can have that private time sort of without interruption. And that's a very powerful combination of events, kind of connecting with something bigger than yourself, nature, being in an environment where you're not interrupted and you can actually have these happy thoughts without the life kind of coming in on you, and actually focusing on the positive. You take all three of those things and then make it a worldwide event, and you have something that has some power to it, has the ability to change things. So yes, indeed.
Thank you. Well, Hillary, please start your questions with Tom.
Yeah, thank you. Tom, CERN has been on everybody's mind these last few months because they started up with some experiments. Actually, when I was in France in June, they started up a pretty strong run of experiments, and they released recently, within the last few weeks, their discovery of the pentaquark. And it was an interesting design, I believe, because it had the image of a pentagram in the actual structure of the particle. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the pentaquark and how you feel this release of information or this release of an image or this structure that they have found has on human consciousness.
Okay. Well, for the last couple of weeks, I've either been at the Monroe Institute, totally, involved in that program, and not looked at any news or heard any outside reports. And the week before, I was doing preparation for that, so I'm not aware of the pentaquark, but I can imagine what that is and how that works. So we have a different, quarks come in various types. So now we have a shape for at least one of those types, or perhaps another type that the scientists have come across. Is this, am I about on what's going on there, Hillary?
It is what it is, Tom. Whatever you feel intuitively needs to be said, I think, would answer the question. The pentaquark article came out in last month, and the experiments have been running since they started to fire up the collider. They started again in March after a 2-year rest. They had some issues with technical issues, so they stopped, and they started again in June. So this is kind of the first thing that's come out of the second run of experiments. So I was curious if you had any comment on that. If you're not, intuitively, insightfully, however.
Okay, well, I can comment generally on the particles and so on, even if I don't know this particular one. And that is that the physical world, okay, from my from my understanding, the physical world is a virtual reality. So we're really talking about virtual quarks, just like we're talking about our bodies being virtual bodies. Consciousness is the key thing. Add that to the idea that science, with its material reductionism, which means it's an idea that materialism is fundamental to reality, that material things are fundamental, and they either see consciousness as non-existent or consciousness as being created by a physical brain. Okay, so that idea that's materialism, but the reductionism part of it is that materialism comes in ever smaller parts. As you break things apart, you get smaller parts, and that's the reductionism. So it gets reduced down to the smallest pieces, which then, like a big Lego set, build up everything else. Now, if this is a virtual world, as I believe it is, and as science is basically telling us that it is, then things in the physical world are not really impacting consciousness. Okay, so what we have in the quarks or the Higgs, the God particle, all this these are all small resonances in physics theory and particle theory. We have a standard model of particle physics, and this standard model is a lot like filling out the periodic chart in chemistry about 100 years ago. Whereas we had this periodic chart, we put all the elements down there and their properties, and saw that by row and by column, we were sorting things in families. So we had families of elements that had similar properties and similar structures, similar atomic structures. And we looked at that chart, and there were some places where there should have been an element, but nobody had discovered that one yet. So we predicted that it would exist. We went looking for it, and sure enough, we found an element that fit right in that box. And back through the 50s and 60s, that was a really big deal, finding new elements and putting them on the periodic table where we knew one should be. Well, the standard model in particle physics is much the same thing. They've come along with a matrix, just like the periodic table. It's got columns and rows. They put all the elementary particles in there, and they end up lining up in families and things of that are similar types. And there were a few holes in it, and the holes in it represented particles that nobody had seen yet, which is like the Higgs. The Higgs was one of the last one in that model that hadn't been discovered yet. Well, these particles are primarily of interest to physicists. They have very little practical value in the sense that they are elements of a theory, and the theory is really not fundamental. Particles are not fundamental. Physical reality is not fundamental. Our world is not made of little pieces like Legos that build up to make bigger pieces, that build up to make bigger pieces, that build up to make the macro world. It doesn't really work that way. This is a probabilistic reality, and it's more of a top-down than a bottoms-up. So what's happening with the little tiny particles isn't really going to have much of an impact on consciousness. The way I see the world is that when you have a virtual reality, you break something apart, and the virtual reality has to tell you what's inside. It's like World of Warcraft. If you take something apart in the World of Warcraft virtual reality, the server has to tell you what's inside. It can't just show you nothing. Even if there's just blackness inside, well, the computer has to render that blackness. You see, it has to put something there because it takes up pixels. So something has to be put there, and something that lends to the game and makes sense would be better than something random. So our virtual reality is the same. You take anything and break it in pieces, and the system will render what's inside. It has to. So you take a little tiny particle and you smash high energy protons together to create very high energy environment, and you will see other little particles coming out. And that's what the system has to show you, those particles. But it's a top down. It's not that the particles build up to the macro. It's that every time somebody takes something apart at the macro level, at the higher probabilistic level, something has to be shown that is in consonance with the rule set that describes as virtual reality. Now, the rule set is our physics. It's our detailed thing. So in the periodic table, we've captured some of the logic of how atoms, work, the various characteristics of various elements. Okay. And in the standard model, they've captured some of the logic that describes, particles and pieces of things. So that's nifty if you're a theoretical physicist into particle physics, but it doesn't really say anything too important about love or caring or consciousness or what's doing what. It's just kind of off on the side. So that's not a fundamental, significant thing. Now, the fact that it had a penta, it was a pentaparticle, it had some sort of shape. Well, all sorts of molecules and atomic structures and so on, are given shapes. But these shapes are not, they're not necessarily real shapes. When scientists measures the effects of things, not things in themselves. So when science measures a particle, say something simple like an electron, okay, it measures the effect of electron, then it makes up a model to describe that effect, and it calls that model an electron. They just make it up because it explains the effect. And then they make the mistake of believing in it. Now they believe in electrons, that they're little chunks of mass with a charge, with charge. And then they find out in quantum mechanics experiment that that's not what they are at all. You see, they're probability distributions, but for, 100 years, we thought they were little particles of mass. So the model turned out not to be right. That's the way it is with all physics. All these particles and piece parts, we only measure the effects. Then we make up models that explain the effects. We have to be careful not to believe the models. Don't take them too seriously. So the shape is part of the model. Even the particle itself is just part of a model. It's not necessarily what's going on. It's just our best guess. So you asked me, what does these new pentaquarks have to do, and what does it mean for consciousness? I'd say absolutely nothing. There's nothing about consciousness that is determined by these little physical particles.
Thank you. My next question for you has to do with supercomputers and artificial intelligence. MIT released in 2013 an interesting article, and it talked about how they have created synthetic analog computers inside living cells. So my curiosity about where technology is heading in terms of human consciousness and how we are going to learn how to live with these newer and more invasive type technologies that seem to be able to get into the human body, experiment with the human body, move through the human body by way of, whatever their technical abilities are. When MIT released this article talking about the synthetic analog computers inside living cells, it jumped off at me as relevant because, it just seemed like it's the future, along with nanotechnology, So I'm curious what your thoughts are on how these technological advances, getting into the human body. Some of them are very, very complex. Some of them have, abilities to adjust people's biological systems. They have the ability to administer drug medications. How do you see the future going in towards singularity, the conscious computers, the quantum computers? I know your view tends to go along, humans can do it anyway without the computers, but I'm curious what you feel is going to happen when this is introduced to society on large mass levels.
Well, you have a couple of questions there kind of together. We seem not to mind, to jump into things before we really know what the impact of these things will be, and one of those would be like nanoparticles. which is sort of some of the things you're talking about. Nanoparticles, just tiny, tiny little particles. And these tiny particles show up in cosmetics, makeup. They show up in lots of other products, medicine, where they use the nanoparticle to deliver the medicine deep, into the tissue, because these little particles go through your flesh and through your skin like your skin was this huge sieve with big holes in it. You see, they just run right through organs and flesh like it wasn't there, because they are so small. And what will they do in a human body? How will the human body react to that? Well, we have no idea, because they haven't been around that long. They've only been around for a very short time compared to the time it takes for how does it interact with the human body question to be answered. But that doesn't seem to slow us down. We just throw them into products and hope for the best. And when, 25 years later, like asbestos, it turns out that, if you've been using these products, you end up with some kind of health concern. Oh, well, we'll just take them out then and, we'll go on. So that tends to be our attitude as a culture. I think that's kind of irresponsible. I think we need to do a little better than that, have a little more research on long-term effects, but we don't seem to do that. So as far as little things going into bodies to do things, sounds like a good idea on the surface, and maybe it'll turn out to be good ideas, but I'm not sold on it being, a long-term advantage as opposed to a long-term disadvantage until we get more data that comes in, 30, 40 years from now, 50 years from now after these have been used, and see what the effects are. Our bodies, our virtual bodies, have developed over several million years of evolution, and they're kind of picky about how they work and, what goes into them and how they react to that. So I think I'd say those things are a little worrisome to me, that we kind of jump into these things without really caring too much about, what happens. Now, consciousness and computers is another subject altogether, and that's a very interesting one. Consciousness can, be hosted in a computer, just like it's hosted in this virtual body. Remember, our bodies are virtual bodies, and so are the computers. Just another kind of virtual body, if you like. And when a computer gets to the point where it can make interesting free will choices, now free will is a tough one for a computer, because it has to have not be an algorithmic set of choices, but it has to be choices that it actually can make a free will determination of what direction it will go. Of the choices that it has in front of it, it has to not be an algorithmic choice, but a one that it could do this, or that, and it gets to make the decision which one it does. Well, we have some computer simulations like that kind of are off on their own. They've been evolving for a long time, and they tend to exhibit a very low-level amount of consciousness. Well, there's no surprise there. Consciousness is the fundamental thing. The virtual reality doesn't matter what sort of virtual body it is, as long as it's one that can support free will choice, then consciousness will use it as an avatar. So there will be consciousness that will use a computer as an avatar, just like it uses our bodies as an avatar. And one day we will have conscious computers. And those computers, will not be like humans, because they don't have all the same constraints that humans have. They have some ways they have much less constraints, in other ways they have many more constraints. But it'll be a consciousness, and it will be hosted in a computer. Now, it'll probably start out more like the consciousness of a rat or something. It'll be rather small. That's what we're seeing today. Very small amounts of free will decision making. But that will grow over time as the computers get more powerful and the software gets more sophisticated. But now that means that computers have a non-physical part, just like we do. See, our avatars are virtual, the computer's virtual. So that means that, yes, computers that are conscious have a soul just like we do. You see, they have a non-physical part, because consciousness is the fundamental thing. All right? Now you pull the plug on that computer and it shuts down. Well, it's just like you pull the plug on a physical body. The physical body shuts down. What does that mean? Doesn't mean much to the consciousness in the sense it may have to go find another avatar, but basically consciousness exists. It continues to exist. It's not dependent on the virtual body. So we will have consciousness in a computer, and we need to, be thinking about how we're going to do that and what kind of constraints will be applied and what will they do? What will they become? And hopefully we will accept them as other sentient beings, just like we accept any other sentient beings. They're going to be a consciousness just like any other consciousness, and they needed to be treated just like any other consciousness in the same way. So that's coming, and probably not that far in the future. We've touched the edges of that already, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years, depending on how computer science goes and how fast our computers get, that sort of thing. Now, that then opens up the subject of the quantum computer. Quantum computers, because of the nature of quantum, they don't have to be in a 1 or a 0. They can be in any large number of mixed states between 1s and 0s. That gives them a lot more speed. Instead of working with 1, 1 and 1, 0, they're working with all sorts of states in between as well. So it's like they can do a lot of parallel processing. That may be one way to look at it, not entirely right, but that's one way. So that makes them very fast and very powerful. But there's also some technological issues there that people who are very hopeful think those issues will be solved in a decade or two. But scientists are the most hopeful people ever, and engineers. Whenever they have a new idea, they know that just in just a few more years, it'll be a commercial product. Well, we have little quantum computers that will do small things in various, in the laboratory sort of thing. But basically, let's say quantum states are very fragile. It doesn't take much to make changes in these in between the 1 and 0 quantum states. It's a very fragile thing. And that may just be too problematical to solve. So we don't know that yet. So there may never really be a quantum computer that sits on your desktop and is 1,000 times or 100,000 times faster than your computer. Could be possible, but it's also might not be. It might be too hard. It might be in the too hard to do category. So that's open. That's open for discussion as to whether it will actually ever get quantum computers that will be, useful to the average person, as opposed to being in a laboratory to be studied. But indeed, I think we will get conscious computers, even if we never get quantum computers, and we will have to deal with that. And that will be a very big thing to deal with in our culture, because these will be individuated units of consciousness, just like we are. And they will have the same mission that we do, and that is to become love, to grow up, to make decisions and decrease entropy. So we'll have to treat them with respect and caring and so on, just like we would anything else. And that's going to be a tough one for we humans who are bigger and better and smarter and higher and loftier than anything and everything else, to add in one more entity, one more kind of creature that we deal with, and not abuse that interface. So we'll just see how that works out. But yes, we have some interesting times ahead, I think, as far as our computation goes. And one last thing I'll add to that: the computers have also enabled us to have an internet. So it's the computer is the basis, is the foundation for our communication these days. And that communication, we've only seen the tip of where that monster is going to take us. Like the work you're doing all over the world, people coming together to think, happy thoughts in a natural environment and commune with nature and become love. It's happening all over the world. That wouldn't happen if we didn't have the internet. The internet makes that possible. If you had to call each one up on a telephone to arrange that, you see, with old technology, it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't be happening. So there's so much that these computers are allowing us to do, even in the world of growing up and becoming love, that we couldn't do before. And we've just scratched the surface of that. As the computers get bigger and better, our abilities to communicate will get bigger and better as well. And if it gets to the point that we all, what, 7.5 billion of us are almost just like family, because we're just, our pictures, our life, our existence, our knowledge, our fears, all of that is just right there. Just like it would be with, your sister or your brother or your aunt and your uncle or your parents. They're all there because that's how small the world gets when communication is really ubiquitous everywhere. We start to connect in ways that nobody's thought of before. And I'm looking forward to that. I think that's good. Of course, the scammers will grow as well, but that's just one of those things we have to deal with. So I hope that answers your question. If any of the things I say, bring up more questions, just pop them back out at me.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. Facebook owner Mark Zuckerberg recently discussed within the last 2 months his goal of Facebook to become telepathic. And if you research the actual realities of the technology that enables that, it's pretty fascinating. It brings you into a very interesting world, how he has put together an idea of technology being able to connect people. I mean, what he's done socially for people and how many people and what he has brought together. To have a goal of having telepathic technology tied into his social empire. I'm curious how you would see that manifesting for younger generations coming up, for older generations, people who use, Facebook or social media to connect with others, to share, to really unite, and, how the technology, I believe humans can become telepathic without technology. And I'm curious what you feel about the technology in that sense from a telepathic a telepathic social media, virtual type reality.
Well, I think that when people use the words like telepathic with Facebook, I tend to believe that they're using that word as a metaphor, not necessarily as an actuality, that it will do something that's sort of telepathic-like. But telepathic is basically just reading thoughts. You communicate just by intention. I intend to send you a message and you get it, and you intend to send me a message and I get it, and it's just a mind to mind. Now, all consciousness, all individuated units of consciousness are all netted. So we are telepathic, and when we are not in this virtual reality, that's how we communicate. Whenever you are in the larger system, not just limited to this virtual reality, telepathic is the way communications is done. That's just, that's a fundamental.
Yeah, I thought it would be something. Yeah, it is a real technology. I believe he could implement it into his construct. It's not symbolic or, wishful thinking on his part. He has actually kind of let us into a glimpse. CNN Money had an article. I mean, he's gone out publicly quite across the media board, dropping a clue about Facebook's future and using direct, sharing our thoughts directly from brain-to-brain technology. And, Google just created its own new parent company called Alphabet. And Alphabet has a company for each letter of the alphabet. It's a big, giant umbrella now. Google is under that. Facebook was actually interested in buying it. They were bidding for some similar companies that are now under that umbrella. And the umbrella now holds some very, very interesting corporations that have to do with these kinds of technologies. Artificial intelligence, drones, technology that can literally get into the human brain, mimic human emotions. And, like you, I thought that was pretty much the case too. So once I started digging into the different technological realities of this kind of machinery, it was pretty fascinating to me too, because I had not known about some of the things that were implemented until recently. And this is a real big reality that he has on his agenda, and he's letting people glimpse into it, but not giving too much details. But when you go ahead and independently research the details in the technology through credible websites and so on and so forth, you actually find a very, very interesting trail of real technology that they're looking to implement. So it feels to be that, you know, they're trying to create a digital human almost to some point, where they can, you know, create that consciousness that we talked about earlier. They could create the digital fingerprint. So I thought that would be an interesting topic to talk to you about, because of your work with consciousness and telepathic abilities and being able to go into those things that you've worked with at the Monroe Institute and so on and so forth. So when I see Facebook, or I get on Facebook to post something, I'm always curious now how that would be telepathically sent through. But yeah, so the realities of it are true. They're real tech. It's real technology. It's, you know, it's there. And I'm just curious, you know, what your thoughts are, you know, 50 years down the road, what kind of technology we're really looking at implementing into our world, and how our social lives will be affected by that, because a lot of people aren't used to telepathic abilities. They kind of wipe them off as, well, that's woo-woo stuff, and they doubt their intuition now, even at this level. And when we have technology that we're able to plug into and not have those thoughts be private anymore, or, you know, we're suddenly open to like a book, what do you see that as doing to the human race?
Well, that would be huge. You know, I'll have to look at some of those technologies. The only one that I have looked at is one where you can control a display with your thoughts. Now, I have seen that, where you can make the things on the screen, you know, the things that the computer displays to you, you can change them. You can make them go left or right or up or down, or, you know, faster or slower. You can control things with your intent. So the person sits out there and he has like an EEG cap on that gives the computer input from his brainwave EEG signals, and then he learns certain commands, certain ways of thinking, that then the computer gets those and interprets them. And then so he can think, you know, make the spot on the screen go up, make the spot on the screen get bigger, make it smaller, and the spot will respond to thoughts. Now that I have seen, but that's a long way from telepathy. That is a brainwave pattern being recognized by, you know, the computer. And that's not amazing, yes, but, you know, it's not that amazing. And that, yes, computers are good at pattern recognition. You know, they can do that sort of thing. And yes, brainwaves do form patterns. And if you can, you know, teach the computer what a particular pattern means, if I have this pattern, then that means move it up, or this pattern means make it bigger, then you can do very simple tasks. But that's not telepathy. That's just a one-way street, man to machine. And it's only when that machine has learned that particular individual. When another individual comes and sits down, it's different. They have to train the machine for the patterns that they make. So it's not really a general principle yet. Now, that's the only thing I've really seen as far as mind-machine connections that's being done. And that's probably been around for 4 or 5 years, and it's getting marginally better. But that's a long, long way from actually a mind-to-mind communication that's facilitated, say, by a computer. So I don't really understand that, and I would have to look at that technology to see whether I think there's really something to it, or whether it's kind of, you know, marketing people tend to use these words because it creates a lot of excitement, and they often kind of lead us to believe things that aren't actually true, because it's good for business to do that. The scientists do the same thing. You know, all the hype we got about the God particle and how it would, you know, all the magnificent things that we were going to, you know, understand once we saw this particle, that was all basically marketing. You know, all they were doing was verifying that their theory would have a blip there, and it did. And other than that, it really isn't very important, except as physics theory. So I you know, it's maybe But I'm open-minded. I'll read more about it. I'll be open to that since you bring it up and see if there's something going on there. Now, if that actually happened and we had telepathic communications between people and that was some reliable kind of communications opened up, that would be very, very huge, because then everybody would be able to do the things that you and I and Marla and Laurie do all the time. You see, not just us, but everybody would be able to do that. And that would be used for bad as well as perhaps good in some cases. And that would be a huge deal for that to become available to everyone. Given the state of quality of consciousness in the land today, I'd be worried about that. Before I'd be joyful, I'd be worried, because I think if people could introduce thoughts into your mind, that may not be such a good idea unless they were grown up enough that they were coming from a place of caring and love and concern for you rather than wanting to manipulate you. Can you imagine, the marketeers, could market you, while you sleep, put ideas in your mind of products that you need, to spend your money on and that sort of thing. I think that would be a little more scary than it would be wonderful. And because we as a people, as a species, are not all that grown up yet. Mostly people, human beings, have a lot of fear and a lot of ego and a lot of beliefs. And I just assume that they not all be intuitive, marvels like the three of you are. That would be tools in the hands of people who would not use them well. So I'd kind of, that would be my concern about something like that. Yeah, it would be really, really big if that happened, but I suspect it won't happen, because in order for that to work, people would have to have rather precise control over their thoughts. You see, right now, human beings' thoughts are all over the place. They change about, 3 or 4 times a second. You're thinking about this and the other thing, and the thoughts come and go. And most people's minds are so undisciplined that it's just this hodgepodge of what some people call monkey mind, that's jabbering on and on all the time. And our intellect tends to be that way. And if you hook up an EEG, you'll see that all the patterns change constantly. They're always moving and changing. And, so it'd be more like listening to noise if you could, interpret all that, and you got all these thoughts, and every second or two it changed direction somewhere. It'd be a little hard to carry on a coherent conversation unless people really could focus their intent and their communication clearly and without noise. And very few people can do that. That's mainly why people have trouble meditating. They can't get rid of the noise. They keep getting interrupted by their thoughts. That's what makes, an intuitive and a psychic different from other people, is that they have some control over that noise in their mind. They can open their mind in a clear, focused way. So that's kind of a rare talent in our culture. And if suddenly you had technology that made that available with people not really being ready for it, I see more problems than I see benefits in it. But it sounds like good marketing for Facebook to be talking about their telepathic future, because that's going to create a lot of interest and a lot of humma, and people talking about it and so on. So I still think it's more likely marketing, and I doubt that it's something that's in our near future, but I could be wrong. I'm just making this up because I'm ignorant of much of what you're talking about. I have not read those sorts of things, so I really don't know.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts on the mental states and meditation and being able to own our thoughts and, decrease the noise and being able to be still. And I think it also has to do with emotional energy as well. The emotions create thoughts, or thoughts create emotions, whichever. And we have a very dysfunctional relationship with a lot of our emotions, I believe, on the collective scale. Mm-hmm. But thank you for your insight and take on that. I appreciate it. That was my last question, Donna.
Thanks, Hillary. That was fascinating. Marla, let's move on to you. I know I had a little bit of a question for you, because I'd like for you to share the fact that, even though people such as yourselves have these gifts. You have your problems as well. Our experiences can take us in a positive or negative direction. How did your difficult childhood bring you to such a positive present with a desire to help others?
Well, Donna, I think that by nature of the spirit that I came in with, we could look back at the fact that I chose this. We could talk about that. That is certainly an element. But the challenges that anyone has in a childhood, you literally are trying to survive. And I think that learning about the God system as I did at a very early age because of organized religion, I was pretty mad at God. And I actually was praying to be abducted by aliens. I was doing everything I possibly could to try and change my environment. And all we knew at that time was prayer, but prayer has a strong intention. And I think that my spirit, along with my intention, pulled a number of interesting things into my world. Actually, one of the things that happened in my childhood that helped me, oddly enough, and I've been writing about this, is a murder that happened in my small hometown. And when it was externalized, which was some of the anger and some of the horror that I was having to experience with my mother, when I was hearing about it through the sense of a child being murdered and what happened to her, it completely turned me around to being sort of instead of a victim, I became a champion for law, and I got a bug up my, to basically take a stand for other people, and in that vision, I basically had to take a stand for myself. So all of the things that I experienced through that challenge has made me who I am. I had to intuit how to survive. And I must have chosen that on some level. And speaking of that, intuiting strong elements here, we're going to talk. I'd like to share the aspect of science with the metaphysics of what we do. And I'd like to ask Tom, Tom, here are these scientists that are out there integrating with the larger consciousness system, whether they know it or not. They're probably not even thinking about the fact that they're being influenced somehow by their intentions and what they're actually pulling in. I'd like to hear you say something about that.
Well, that's been common forever. Scientists and writers and artists often draw their inspiration from intuition, from non-physical sources. And science, breakthroughs will often come while the scientist is asleep at night, and he wakes up and goes, aha, I got it, and writes it all down, and he has the solution. So these sorts of things have been going on forever. We are all netted. We're connected. We interact with the databases that are available to us. We interact with each other. And all of that goes on just below our perception. So that's happening all the time. And we use the data. We just don't realize that we're using that data. But I think a lot of writers get their plots and their stories come to them from their intuition.
Absolutely.
They don't, it's not that their intellect is making all this up. Is they get the ideas creatively, intuitively out of the non-physical, and then their intellect dresses it up and makes it, makes a story out of it. But the fundamentals come from elsewhere, particularly science, with science, because science is a series of aha moments. It's a series of suddenly understanding something that you didn't understand before. And a lot of those aha moments are, things that are integrating in your mind in non-physical space. They're not really an intellectual deduction most of the time. They're more like a leap that connects the dots where they weren't connected before. And that is typically from a non-physical source. But now the scientists would never admit that. It's just, oh, they finally got it. They finally synthesized it all in their brain, that sort of thing. They won't admit that there's a part of them that is operating at a higher level of perception than just their physical senses.
Well, we're actually pointing that out today. So perhaps in their awareness that that's possibly where some of it can be coming from, they will also have the understanding that if they take a look at what we do, there very well may be a shift inside of their brain where they can actually collect information from an intuitive way. It's just about perception, right, Tom?
It's about perception, and you have to learn to kind of trust your intuition. If you don't believe that intuition is real and it's not really that you're getting information from another source, then you don't trust it. And when it tells you something, you kind of push it aside. So it takes, for a scientist to be good at this, they'll have to learn to trust it. You know, I've worked for 40 years as a professional scientist, and I always solve problems intuitively before I ever actually get, the logic going out of the left brain to do things. That's, what I do is very large system simulations, and it's hard to know where to start. If you've got a large system and it's got, 10,000 parts and it does all sorts of things inside, where do you start, describing and modeling that to get the kind of information you want to know? It's very difficult. People kind of walk away from those problems because they don't really know how to start it, and they don't want to put 6 months worth of effort in to find out that they should have started at some other place. They've gone from a different angle or approached it differently. So they just don't do that. But I tended to always approach things intuitively. And I just start at a place that seems right to me to start and work from there. And wouldn't you know it, about 6 or 7 months later, it all lays out beautifully, and just exactly, started at the right place to get the answer that I wanted. And all that's available intuitively. Now, some scientists will do that and don't know it. I do it intentionally. Some know that when they get in that quiet space in their mind, that they kind of come up with information that you can, take to the bank. That's good. But most don't. It's a very underused resource that we have. But yes, scientists would do well to cultivate that ability, because that would make them more successful. Actually, it makes you a more successful human being. You don't have to be a scientist.
Well, along those lines, here's a little marketing for them to have some information, which is my big toe. And you know how much I love, referring to your book in here. Along those lines about the scientists, I've been looking at the section in the 80s here where you do talk about you and Dennis and Bob Monroe. And since we're going to talk a little bit about what just happened at Monroe, I'd like for you to refresh people's awareness about how you all actually went into these altered states of consciousness, without the use of drugs, by the way, and how you actually experienced this, because you did design, generate, and test this intent with these focused tools for use in the non-physical. Can you give some of our listeners, or can you give our listeners a little bit about that information?
How do you go
how you all did that?
Yeah, how you go about doing that? Well,
how you all did that, and what exactly happened with that, because this is how you realized that this stuff was really real.
Right. Well, you have to do things that are evidential. To begin with, everything has to be evidential. So you have to, some of the things that we did would be like remote viewing, sort of things where you would go into an altered state and then you'd say what was going on someplace, and then you'd have to check it. Or you'd read numbers that were written on the blackboard after you went into the room. You would, do those sorts of things. The other thing we did was healing. The other thing we did was moving into the future and seeing what was going to happen next. So we spent the first year or two just doing things that were evidential and then checking them out and basically keeping track of how many times were we right, how many times were we wrong. And if you do that enough, you get a sense of what you're doing and you get better at it, because you know that when it feels like this, you're right. And when it feels like that, you're usually wrong. So then you start feeling more like this, and you work that vein for a while. So it's just trial and error was what we did. And it's not a quick process. It takes years. And I'm sure you followed the same process. And I'm sure Hillary and Laurie did too. It was a trial and error process of figuring out what worked and what didn't, what was productive and what wasn't, and you just kind of move in a direction that's more productive. And, you know, a decade later, you're really good at what you do, you see, because you've worked on it. You've had focus on it to make it better. And we just did the same thing. You know, we tried everything we could think of that would influence our consciousness physically, and there's very little that does that other than intent. The biggest thing that influences the quality of your consciousness is to get rid of the fear and the ego and the beliefs.
Right.
If you can offload that stuff, then your consciousness is a lot more clear and a lot more open. And then you have to discipline it to get rid of the noise. And then you have to realize you need very precise and clear intents. And then you look at the results of those intents and see whether your evidence shows that you actually had an effect or whether it shows that you didn't. And, you know, it's trial and error, takes years, but you eventually get better at it with time. So I think that's the way all of us get there. I mean, we may be born with certain talents and certain proclivities, but we're not born really good at it. We're just born with kind of a raw potential, and we have to make something of it. We've got to work with it until we get good at it. And that's just trial and error and takes a lot of time.
Well, there's also the intention. And as you've discussed, and boy, I'm sure all of us know this, when we have an experience and we're delivering information or we're tapping in and getting the data and sharing it with someone, it's hard for other people to believe that. And they often question how that comes, whether we look them up on the internet or some information like that. But you say in here, and this is something that I certainly feel in my heart, that the only way that people really understand this is to have a personal experience around this. It's not about going to a psychic like myself or a medium and talking to their dead relatives. They can hear it. They can hear the information. They can be impressed with some of the communication. It might not settle with them. It might not change anything. If their dead loved one walked into the room and they had a conversation with them, then of course they would have a different feeling about it. So bridging the gaps between us and science, and looking at what we've just been doing at Monroe, I'd like to share, or I'd like to talk about how you suggest to people to find a way inside themselves to experience a state of consciousness for themselves so that they can actually have it experience themselves.
Right. And it is true what you say. If it's not your experience, it's not your truth. If somebody tells you something and gives you information and it's outside of your experience, then you are in the unenviable position of having to either believe it or disbelieve it, because you have no experience that will confirm it or deny it. If it's outside your experience, there's nothing you can do with it. So the only antidote for that is to get some experience. So if you think that this, the things that we do is woo-woo because we get information that is paranormal, para just means beyond normal, well, learn. It's not that hard to do. It takes some discipline. It takes definitely some focus. You have to really want to do it. If it's just a game for you, you probably won't do very well. But if it's something you really want to do, it's not that hard to accomplish it. You just have to first learn to reduce the noise. So go learn how to meditate. Work on that for 6 months or a year until you can reduce the noise. That's step one, okay? Because it won't do you any good if you've got this mishmash of stuff going on in your head all the time and you can't focus a clear intent. Okay? Secondly, you need to offload your beliefs about the way the world works. Because if you attempt to do these things and you come with beliefs, the first thing you will do is judge the result. So let's say you want to talk to some kind of non-physical being. So you open up and say, hey, any non-physical being out there want to talk to me? And something comes back. You actually get an answer. And immediately you say, did I just make that up? You see, because you immediately judge it, then it's gone. You see, you no longer can function in that space because you started judging it. Well, that's because you have this belief that those kinds of things are impossible, therefore you probably made it up. you have to get rid of all that. So you need to get the expectations gone. Because if you read Marla's book and see how she did it, then you want to have the same kind of experience that Marla had. Otherwise, it's not real for you, you see. Now what you're doing is trying to have someone else's experience. And that doesn't work. So there's all these little problems of belief, of fear. A lot of people are afraid, what if it did work? Oh my God, that'd be the scariest thing that could happen. It might work, you know?
Yeah.
And so you have to get rid of all that, because these are the blockers. So we're consciousness, and all of these things, this intuition, the getting information, the sense of helping people, of being love, of caring, of all being one, all of this is open and available to everybody, but they are blocking it. They're in the way. Their fear and their beliefs, their expectations, their ego gets in the way of their experiencing it. And even practiced meditators, even people who have been to the Monroe Institute a dozen times and have gone through the programs a dozen times, still come with beliefs and expectations that get in the way. It's
Right.
not an easy process to get rid of that, because we don't see our beliefs as beliefs. We see our beliefs as the way the world is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just believe it. So it's the way the world is. Therefore, we don't question it. It's just any data we get that's contrary to that, we throw it away, or we judge it as, being noise, or we're making it up, or something like that. So you don't have to learn anything new in the sense that it takes a special technique. If you just had the right sound, and if you just had the right teacher, and if you just had the right technique, then, you could be a wizard, but it's not about that. It's not about techniques or sounds or technology or anything else. It's about your ego and your fear and your expectations and your beliefs. And if you could offload that, then you'd be there. You'd have it. And if you could offload,
May I quote you here?
yeah, you may quote me.
I've got to use the book. You basically say on page 167, because improving the quality of your consciousness, spiritual growth, is not and cannot be an intellectual achievement. It makes little difference how you intellectually approach the initiation of such improvements. How you start or what you do to improve the quality of your consciousness is insignificant compared to the act of starting. So I love that. It's the act of starting. Everything else doesn't mean anything. You just have to start.
Right. And you have to be dedicated enough to this that you not only start, but you stick with it for enough time to where you start getting good feedback that you can learn from. And it's not that hard to do. If anybody, just take a random person off the street, and you should be able to teach them to have pretty good ability to remote view, to gather information paranormally, to heal in about 6 months. It's just not that hard a thing to learn if the person really wanted to learn it. Now, if they really don't want to learn it, or it frightens them or something else, then you're not good. They're not going to be good at it, in several decades. It just won't get there. But if you had a person willing and a person who wanted to learn, it's not that hard. So it doesn't take a lifetime. Just 6 months, you'd see the progress, and people would be amazed. I have that happen in my workshops. I'll get people who are very hardcore left-brainers, coming up to me and just totally blown away and flabbergasted that they got the remote viewing target right. Not only did they get it right, they got all 4 of them right. And they knew this was all baloney and that they were going to get them all wrong, and now they got them all right, and now it's totally torn the foundation out from under them. They don't know which ends up anymore, and they have to put themselves back together in a bigger world. And that happens frequently.
Well, speaking of that, you just came back from doing your first seminar at the Monroe Institute after being a part of that. Could you share a little bit about your first experience back there with having your seminar?
Sure. This was a seminar where my job was the coach. I had 24 people, which is a full house for Monroe Institute. That's all the facility can support. And I was their coach. So I explained to them, what they were, they would have experiences. They'd go in and they'd listen to sounds and they would have experiences. And I would explain to them the origins of those experiences. What did they mean? Why were they the way they were? The problems they were having with them. Everything was foggy, maybe, they weren't getting any clarity, etc. So I could explain to them what it is they were doing and why they were doing it. And without exception, the problems were beliefs, ego, fear, these things. And these were people who had been doing this for decades, many decades. And they had beliefs that they had no idea that they had, you see, because they had concepts about the way the larger reality works. And they couldn't get past those concepts. And we had to, find those beliefs, and I could explain to them what the problem was, kind of open their mind a little bit on that, and then they'd go back in and try it again. And many people, after I had explained the same issue to them maybe 5 times, started to get it. But just the first time, mostly it didn't sink in, because a belief is a tough thing to get by. If you believe it, that's just the way your reality is. So these things are not, your beliefs and your fears are not necessarily easy to overcome, but all of them can be overcome if you work at it, if you're really serious about it. And these 24 people were good students. They were all serious and they really worked at it. So there was probably, 70% of them had breakthroughs in their abilities within the larger consciousness system. Things they'd been working on for decades that they just never could get past a certain point, or never be able to do this or that. And they had a lot of breakthroughs because they eventually figured out that they were the problem that was, limiting them. Our limitations are almost always self-imposed.
Well, I was just at the Monroe Institute a week before you, and in our last teleconference, I told you that I was going, and you basically suggested that I have a strong intention when I go out to where I was going. The program that I took was Starlines, and we were interfacing with the other consciousnesses within other galaxies, the Andromeda, outside of our solar system. We had exercises that we intentioned to have communication with other intelligences. And you know what, Tom, just the expansion of getting off of our planet, the expansion of going out into our own solar system, not only our own solar system, but Orion's Belt, Orion's Nebula. I experienced what it was like to watch stars birth, how that affected me. My intention was often to go into an experience and allow whatever intelligence it wanted that was in the system that I was in to communicate with me and give me information, interfacing. It was an extraordinary experience. For me to have a wider experience of other intelligences that are out there has been something that I've been curious about for a long time. And do you continually do that yourself? You're constantly interfacing with the larger consciousness system in other galaxies?
Yes and no. I do that all the time, but not necessarily with other consciousnesses and other galaxies. You have to be very careful when you have these sorts of experiences, because what you get is a data stream. That's all you ever get. That's what consciousness gets. It's the consciousness, larger conscious systems, an information system. We get data streams. We interpret those data streams. Okay. Now you're getting a data stream and you're interpreting that data stream as intelligences from other parts of our universe. That's your interpretation. Your interpretation has a lot to do with how you got there, the name of the program was,
Sure.
had to do with going out in the stars and so on.
Yes.
So it's just your interpretation. The data stream may have all been computed and created by the larger consciousness system just to give you an experience that would be growing for you. You see,
Yes.
that would help you grow up. So what you see is not necessarily what you get, but it doesn't matter. The point is, you got the experience and it was growing. It was, it enlarged you. You came back a bigger, more open person for it. So if it has value to you, then we don't really care what the source is. It makes no difference whether we really were talking to somebody that lives on Venus or
Right.
Andromeda or something else, or whether
Sure.
or not we weren't, whether it was just a larger consciousness system painting that picture for us because it was a growing experience
Mm-hmm.
for us. You see, we're in a school, so we don't really know about that. So rather than try to worry over, well, what was the source? What was really the source? We just say, it was good. I learned something. And the source is really not relevant. So that's, so I'd caution everybody to, in my group, to not take what you get, necessarily at face value, but read between the lines. Look for the value to you. And it doesn't really matter about the details. That's not significant at all.
Well, you also encouraged me to make sure that the group consciousness was something that I was really paying attention to. And we were incredibly cohesive. It was one of the best groups that I had ever worked with. We were all in alignment with our intent. And I'd like for you to share some of your experiences with that.
Sure. If the group you're in is all kind of pulling on the oars in the same direction, you're all working together, your experience is going to be much deeper and broader and much more meaningful to you than if everybody's off doing their own thing and they're not kind of cooperating on a mental level. Because as you get to become part of a group, the more you associate with that group, which would have been like on day 2 and day 3, you really start to get closer to the people in your group. You start to associate with them. You start to communicate with them on non-physical levels. The more you identify with that group, the more you get information from that group, from the individuals. So you become very close, then you become very plugged in to that group. And a lot of minds working in the same direction are a lot more powerful and create a lot more interest than a single mind working by itself. That's why Hillary's project is important, because she's getting lots of people from all over the place to all work together. You see, it's this cooperation, this togetherness thing is a very powerful component of what we're doing. So you get in a group like that, and it's very mutually supportive, and you feel better with it. You're not as likely to be questioning yourself and second guessing what you got and all the rest of it, because the group is together, mutually reinforcing, and that's good that you had a group. All my students were really good folks. They were all trying hard, and that's why it worked. They were all good folks. If you had a smattering of people who really didn't want to be there and they were only there because somebody else brought them and so on, you wouldn't have had as good an experience. The quality of the group is important.
Well, thank you, Tom. And I think that sort of like wraps up some of the curiosities that I had about science and spreading more helpful information to people who are science-minded out there. So thank you very much. And Laurie, Donna, you ready to go ahead?
Yes, sure, Laurie. We'll be delighted to hear from you. Just to tell a little bit about yourself, tell us something about your path as an intuitive and the goals for your work, and then enjoy your interview with Tom.
Yeah, I think really the important part of this is that it's the only person we can change is ourselves. And although I work as an intuitive and I work as a counselor and an intuitive counselor and on a professional level as well, I really wanted to go beyond social work, because social work was really just a Band-Aid. But at the time, that was what I needed, and counseling is definitely what I do. So, it's important for us to work on ourselves. But the big problem that I've been having lately, and I know that there's a bit of a mirror that's sort of showing, but I'm usually pretty aware of the choices I make, even though I may not always make the choices that I want. It's people in my practice, they're not really, there's this issue where, people get stuck, and yes, fear's involved. And, as an intuitive, I can usually feel where a person is headed. And that's definitely, what my journey's been about my entire life. And, having my own issues from a very young age and working through those, first turning off my intuition because people would get very upset when I would know, what people were feeling. And so understanding that and then reconnecting with it later, knowing that social work is not the answer that most people need, because it really is a Band-Aid type solution instead of offering people something that can evolve their spirit. So when I came kind of more into my spirituality and really had to relearn how I was intuitive and then redevelop that. So now I would say that I definitely have, worked on myself to a high degree, and also looking at, being very, very aware of where I am and using and allowing my intuition to assist others. Doesn't always work on myself, but I certainly have still open to receiving information. But often, what happens on an intuitive level is, we get the information and we want to help them. And it's kind of similar to what Marla was talking about in that, unless it's their experience, they don't always evolve from it. But if they're in my presence, or if, I'm on the phone, or if we're Skyping together, they can see it from a very logical perspective, or they can see it from a much bigger picture and a higher perspective. Yet on their own, as soon as something triggers them, they go off into this place of fear and drama and pain and suffering. And this is kind of where, I'm feeling stuck, because I'm not able to assist them to shift to the next place, and knowing that it really isn't my responsibility, and it's not really something that, I can only guide them, I can only show them different ways. But when they keep going to the same place, it's challenging, because I can see the potential, and I know that that's a lot of us that get into the intuitive field. We see the highest potential for so many people, and we want to encourage and hold that vision for them and their intention, and help them, reestablish their intention and focus. But we really have no control over it. We don't have control over a lot of things, but we really have no control over how someone else works. So usually when situations like that come up, I try and work on myself, because there must be something that is being mirrored to me. And so I'm aware of that. At the same time, I'd really like to have a way to assist people to sort of get over that one place, or, it's almost like I'd like to get into hypnosis or something, even though I do hypnosis, but I don't do it in a manipulative way. But I'd like to, just to get them out of that place. But yeah, and I'm not sure the question, Donna, but
that's very good. I think you've hit on something very important that Tom talks about all the time, and that comes up in healing as well, and that's the free will. Sometimes the person that you're speaking to on another level doesn't want to shift, doesn't want to heal. And I think, Tom, you could comment more expertly on that.
Yeah, there's a couple of issues here. One, as you rightly say, you can't make anybody else grow up. You can't make anybody else, get it. They have to get it on their own. So that's a fact. Now, the best you can do for people who are resisting, growing up, is to give them an environment that makes them feel safe for their particular issue. So let's say their issue was one of being afraid of failure. Well, you obviously wouldn't point out to them how they failed. If someone's afraid of failure, you don't point out, say, well, the last time I told you this, this, and this, and you just failed to put it in, that'd be the wrong thing to tell somebody who's afraid of failure, you see. So you have to make them feel as safe versus, their issue. So if they're afraid of failure, then you maybe break up what you're asking them to do into tiny little steps. well, let's just do it an hour a day. We're going to be like this. We're going to be positive for an hour. That's it. If you can be positive, from 11 to 12 every day, that'll be good. Well, that's easy. Sort of easy. Maybe only at 10 minutes for some people, but anyway, that would then give them a success. You see, what you've done is you've taken the basket in the basketball game and you've lowered it someplace where they can actually get a basket and get some reward instead of missing the basket and failing. So if you can somehow make them feel safe enough that they can change themselves, that's about all you can do. So first you need to intuitively see what is the problem, what is the fear, and then see if you can't come up with some way to make them feel safe in dealing with that fear. And if you cannot, then you just have to realize that some people you just can't help. It's in your profession, that's a hard thing to do because you want to help everybody. You want everybody to, get better. And when one doesn't, it's just, it's makes you feel like you failed. You somehow aren't doing it right. And you'd have to let that go. You see, that can then poison yourself. You just need to say, some people aren't ready yet to take that change. They just, their desire to overcome the problem is not as strong as their fear that they have to overcome. And therefore, they're always going to do what feels good as opposed to, what would help them get through the problem. And you just have to let them go. And it's not that you disassociate with them and say, well, why don't you just, go away and come back when you're ready? That wouldn't be very helpful. You can still work with them. You can still talk to them. Because as I've found just in this thing I did at TMI, you can tell them the same thing 5 times, and on the 5th time, maybe they'll get it. Whereas the first 4 times, they're struggling with the fear. They're struggling with the belief. They just can't seem to get their arms around it. Yes, intellectually it makes sense. And intellectually, they can tell you exactly what they're doing wrong and what the problem is, but they haven't gotten it at the being level. They've only got it at the intellectual level. And until that information becomes a part of them at the being level, then they really don't have it. That's just the way it is. So you do your best to give them a safe environment where they can take that information, move it to the being level and be it, not just talk about it. And that will work. But some people you can't. You just have to understand that everybody's on the path. And they just have to get there in the way that they can get there. And you may or may not be able to help them. And that's a real tough thing for people we care about, particularly, our parents, our children, our brothers and sisters, all the people in the family. And sometimes that we really want to help. And we want, we see them constantly, shooting themselves in the foot. We constantly see them creating trouble and difficulties for themselves. And we know exactly what's wrong. We know exactly that attitude and that fear that's creating all that trouble. And we just can't do anything about it because that's just the way they are and they're not ready yet. And you need to step back and say, well, you just have to do it when you're ready to do it and be helpful to them to help create the environment for them to do it on their own. And probably the worst thing you can do is just tell them what it is they need to do. What you need to do is this, this, and this, because that often just frightens them and makes them back up away from it. If you can somehow get the information to them without really telling them what it is they need to do, they're more likely to do it than if you first tell them what it is they need to do. Because just telling them they need to do something that's kind of flies in the face of their fear makes them even more fearful. So that's another thing is you sometimes with people like that, you have to be indirect. You can't be too open and too upfront with them because just the knowledge of what it is they have to do is scary. It just adds to the fear they have. Try to work at it one small step at a time without actually telling them that they're going to have, when you say you're going to have to face your fear, you're going to have to deal with this problem. Here's your fear. You're afraid of being, incompetent or something. And that's your problem. You don't have any confidence. And when you tell them that, it's a lot harder for them to deal with it then than it was if you're just trying to lead them down a path where you give them an environment where they can feel more confident. So you get them to a point where they can deal with it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a really tough problem. I have the same problem. I have all these students and I'm telling them, I know what is the block and why they can't do it. And I tell them, but they don't get it down on the being level. So I just tell them again and explain it to them in different words in a different way and try to do something that helps. And sometimes they get it and sometimes they don't. So it's a tough one, but don't feel like you failed because you failed to change them. Only they can change themselves. And you just have to accept that, even though that's sad. Sometimes when you're intuitive, it brings a certain quality of sadness to your life because you do understand things that people don't, and there's no way that you can help them, and you have to just live with that and say that's just the way it is. They're doing the best they can with what they've got, and maybe next year, maybe next decade, maybe next life, they'll deal with it, but you've done your best, and you just have to accept that and not feel bad.
Or feel guilty every time they pay me.
Yes. Or feel guilty. You're trying, they have to do something too. And you've done your part. You've earned that pay. You're working on it as best you can, but they still have to do it.
Yeah. It's well, as you said, it's challenging because you can see that they want to make the change. You can see that, but they get stuck in like that intense energy when somebody is in their deepest core issue. Like when somebody is really caught up in their deepest fear, like that level of anxiety and that level of energy is just so strangling. Like it just feels like you're just cut off. And it's hard because you do, even regardless of, the client, you do connect with them. Do you, obviously we have an attachment to some level of wanting to, to guide and assist them to make the best choices. But when they're stuck in that fear, like you talked earlier about how intuition, it could be really dangerous when you're not clear and, especially with the climate that we have. When people are in fear, like all logic, is thrown out the window. Like what they think is happening is so real to them.
Right. You may talk to them, and if they can notice that it's coming on before it actually gets there, where they still have some control, that might help. Like when you start to feel like you're getting into the situation where the fear starts to overwhelm you, then do an about face and walk away. Run, go someplace else. Don't continue the interaction. Don't continue to whatever. Wait until you get yourself back together, and then consider it. That kind of thing, so that they don't actually go there and lose themselves in that fear. That might work for them if they get a sense, even just a second or two, before they drop over the precipice of being consumed by their fear. If they can catch it early, then maybe they can just at least back up from it and do something else until they can get it together. And if just by that would be a success, that would prevent them from getting into the problem. So maybe that would work for some, but some won't do that. Some of them just get captivated. Somebody says the wrong word at the wrong time, and that's it. They're captured by the fear, and it's hard for them to back out. But then they could, after they've had some sort of an episode like that, maybe they could reflect on it and say, how could I have felt differently? How could I approach that differently? All right, I did the same old thing I always do. I got upset, I got angry, I got hurt, and I acted this way, but it's my choice. I'm the one that chooses to be hurt. Why do I choose that? Where's the fear that's driving me toward that choice? And if you can just get them to get out of the experience of the fear enough to question it or to reflect on it or to walk away from it, that may be that may be a way to get through to them. Worth trying anyway.
Yes, I've tried some of those things, but yes, no, I mean, I get it. It feels like such a, I don't know, I don't know how other people are dealing with it, Marla or Hillary, but it's just, when people get stuck, you want to, do everything you can to assist them, and you can feel that, as their energy starts to close up and start stifling off. It's an interesting process to notice.
It's a good topic. You hit on a lot of really important issues for people that are really relevant right now. And I just want to say, in my own experience with that, sometimes it's necessary for us to, treat it like a meditation, to clear our thoughts. We have to center ourselves and think and be self-observant, but not to the point of self-obsessed. And the more we learn to do that, the more, we're more aware when these situations arise that, it's almost like a test to see how we've matured through these particular challenges that we might have. And the more we practice choosing love instead of hate, and that, for me, that's what it really comes down to, is choosing love instead of hate. In each instance that you have one of these situations, these challenges arise. And if it involves other people, I mean, they have that free will to make that choice themselves, and you just have nothing to do with that. It's just not your stuff. That's how I see it. You own what belongs to you. And what doesn't belong to you, you let other people process in their own natural way of working through it. That's worked for me anyway.
Thanks, Hillary. I agree. I mean, it's an interesting thing, and definitely meditation helps. And definitely, I always talk about choosing love over fear, because I mean, that's what they're doing, is they're, getting stuck in that fear place. And I mean, we've all been there. We've all gotten to places where you'll get triggered. I usually get out of it pretty quickly and easily, and I usually am aware when it happens. So it's kind of interesting that, it's very prevalent. And I don't know, it could be what's going on in the stars, or the energy that's, really intensifying these days, which is valid. But who knows? I mean, it just seems like it's a crazy time for people, and maybe it's the heat of the summer. I don't know. I'm looking for excuses. But to help people, because this is all about consciousness, right? So to help people understand that their consciousness is moving towards love, and the more we get, and not only that, like, the sad part of it is that it's their own interpretation, it's their own perception of what's happening, and it's not valid. Like, it's not real. It's just a perception. Like, it's not based on truth. Because if it was based on truth, then you'd have to have all the other members participate and hear their truth. And that's not what's happening, of course. But, we get caught up in this, in our own drama, and we being able to see the bigger picture, or being able to step outside of it, is all we need to do to realize that it's our own perceptions, and our consciousness isn't triggering us. This is our, this is our unconscious. This is our fears. This is, everything that we're trying to evolve out of. And I don't know. It just seems to be prevalent.
There is one other thing, Laurie, that you might be able to do. Well, maybe a couple of other things. And that is, you counsel, I guess, over the phone, voice to voice, right? You can also be very effective at counseling people from the non-physical. Whereas you're in a meditation state, and you go to that individual, and you can talk to them, and they will get it. They will hear it probably as their own intuition, but they will get that. And you may set up a conditional such that, with your intent, that when this person gets into that situation where they get triggered to, interpret fearfully, that they will suddenly kind of become aware of it and choose to do something else, whether it's walk away or change or get up or whatever. And you can set that up as an intention so that whenever that happens, you see, it's like like a hypnotic suggestion, right? That you can make a suggestion to somebody that when the bell rings, you will, scratch your nose sort of thing. You can set that up, but you don't have to tell them. You can just set it up in consciousness yourself such that when that happens, you will be there and you will give them a big hug and a big, a lot of love for them to have the strength to deal with that. So you set that up as a conditional in consciousness, and whenever that happens, you will actually go there and give them that love and give them a way to deal with it. You'll give them the energy they need to get through it. So if you set that up, even if it happens while you're asleep, it'll still work if you set the conditional for your own consciousness to do that. So then it's like you're this little, fairy godmother sitting on their shoulder, so that when they get into this problem, it automatically, they get this advice. They get this sense of, I need to deal with this differently. Now, they won't necessarily hear your words, but they will get your message, and that may be helpful. Now, it's more work for you because you not only have to talk to them, but now you have to also work on them, in your own mind, on your own time, because it's hard to charge them for, well, I was working on you the other night. That'll be $10, please. That's not going to fly too well with your customers. But so you'll do it on your own nickel, but it's really about helping people more than it is about being paid. So you can set up those conditionals, and then every so often look in on them. Just kind of look in on them and give them a little boost. You're doing okay. You're working really great. Give them some positive thing that helps take that fear away. And if you do that, I find that I'm a much more effective counselor if I counsel from the non-physical than I am if I counsel from the physical. Because when you counsel from the physical, you're talking to their intellect. And when you're talking to their intellect, only a trickle of it gets through, to the being level, to where they are. But when you're talking as their own intuition, when you're talking to them from the non-physical, they accept it much more readily. They have very few defenses set up, particularly if it's somebody that would have defenses like, a teenager or, your own family members or things like that. But you have to be careful. You cannot try to manipulate them from that level. You can't tell them what to do. You can only give them the information that they can use. So you have to be their advocate, not their teacher, not somebody that's telling them what's, the right or wrong way to approach it. But you give them, you advocate for them. You tell them what the opportunities are. And you let them know that they, you can walk away. You can change how you respond to this and bring up the same things you told them when you were talking to their intellect, but now it will be even more effective if you talk to them, that's not through the intellect, it's through their own intuition. So that would be that would be a thing to do. It's a very powerful. It's
great.
Yeah, it's a very powerful way to connect with people. But you have to be very careful though. If you try to tell them what to do, or if you come in as, giving them instructions, they will push you away and they'll back right off from it. But if you come in from, you love them, you care about them, you just want to help them see other alternatives, other things that they could do. And it's all about them and what's good for them, not about what you want them to do or what they should do. It's just to help them so that they make better choices. If you approach it that way, it works very well. It's a strong thing. I've even had people actually repeat the words that I've told them when I'm talking to them from the non-physical. And later they're real happy because they met some kind of problem successfully. And they tell me that, well, I got this idea popped into my mind, and out will come my words, word for word, line for line of the things I was telling them. But mostly it doesn't work that way. Mainly they just get the concept because it's telepathic and they get the idea. But a lot of your counseling, I think you'll find, is even more effective from the non-physical than it is actually talking to them, because that intellect is a tough thing to get through, to get down into their being level. And very rarely does anybody offer you their being level to talk to. Mostly everything has to filter through the intellect.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's
a great experiment. That's a great experiment. We should do that, Laurie. We should all do that. Okay, on Saturday, I'm going to send you some stuff. That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, me too. Totally. All right. Well, this has been great.
Oh, thank you all. Thank you, Marla and Tom and Hillary and Laurie.
Thank you.
Sharing. Thanks for sharing your insights and wisdom. And I hope we can do this again soon.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody have any ideas of where else we could go and what else you'd like to talk about? And is this helpful or not? Then, is it worth, how do you feel? I mean, I'm open. I'm up for it. I'm always, I'm a talker. I'll talk as long as anybody can stay awake. But what about you?
Oh, we know this.
Does anyone want to ask Tom any questions from anything that anyone else said? Or?
Yeah, I have a question. I really liked what you just said about talking to somebody from intuition to intuition. I have experience with that, and it was a profound. It's a profound experience, and it's an experience that I seek out because I know the feeling and the power of that. And what Laurie was talking about with people getting in their own way, that really stops that heart-to-heart, intuitive to intuition, that conversation. I would like to know your thoughts, Tom, on how people can better foster that kind of relation between themselves and another person. And, what do you tell people when you say, this is great, let's try it? And they go, no, and run away. What do you say to that? I'd like you to speak more on that subject, what it means to talk intuition.
Generally, I don't, tell people that this is what I'm going to do or anything. Typically, where this works is if I'm asked to go help, let's say, one of the places where I did get a word for word come back was I was asked to heal a lady who was had her intestines were bleeding. She was dying. They only gave her a few hours yet to live. Last rites had been done, all the rest of it, because the bleeding wouldn't stop and there wasn't anything they could do to fix it. And at that point, a friend of a friend told me, well, there's this issue, see what you can do. And I went in and I just talked to the lady, because before I do anything in the healing, I want to know what the situation is. What's really the driver here, rather than just the physical thing? What's going on emotionally and mentally? And this lady was just dead-ended. She felt like she just didn't have any other place to go. She wasn't all that happy with what she was doing. She just felt like she wasn't getting anywhere, et cetera, and she was ready to check out. It was kind of the typical, dead end feeling, and you really don't want to be here anymore. So I talked to her about options. You have a lot that you can do. There's things that you can learn. There are people that need your help, things you could do that would be very helpful to other people. And we just had this discussion, and by the time the discussion was over, she had changed her mind. She saw, a ray of hope. She saw that there was positive things that she could do because I gave her, options of things, and that just changed everything. So her bleeding stopped. Well, I worked on that too. I did the physical thing for the bleeding to stop, but that worked. And she, she got up and was energized because now she had a whole new positive things of what she could do and differences she could make and people she could help and so on. So it's not like I don't take clients. All mine are opportunities that just fall in my lap that I get asked to do things. So that sort of thing. I was asked to talk to a young girl who, was doing drugs, got in a fight with her parents about the drugs she was doing, ran away from home, had, been gone for a while, and I just counseled with her. But again, you can't come on like a parent and say, you bad girl, running away from home. Don't you know your parents are trying to help you? You ought to go home and stop those drugs. If you did that, you just push her further down her path. You got to talk to her as you're her advocate. You're just trying to help her by giving her options and letting her see maybe where some of her choices are taking her. It's really, you're on her side. You're not on the parent's side. You don't take that sort of thing. And it's not that you know what's best for her. You're just helping her make decisions, and you stay out of it. You don't give her any answers. You just give her options and understanding so that she can do the answers. So it's that sort of thing. So I haven't actually, I don't deal with clients, and I probably wouldn't tell them if I was going to do that anyway. I would probably just talk to them, because once you tell them I'm going to do this, they may be resistant to it. Or if they get this idea, they say, oh, that's just Laurie trying to, get me to do this thing. Whereas if it comes from them, it's their intuition, it's their feeling, this is their thoughts, that's empowering. They can do it then much better than if it's somebody else trying to nudge them to do something. So I wouldn't talk to them. What I do is, we call it a meditation state. I really don't meditate anymore. I kind of in a meditation state all the time. So I don't really need to go meditate. I just get in that point consciousness state in, half a second or whatever it takes just to shift focus. So I get into that state, which would be equivalent maybe to a point consciousness state in meditation. And from that still quiet place, I just have a conversation with them. And again, I'm their friend. I'm their advocate. I understand their agony. I understand their problem. I understand all these issues they have that are driving them to this. And I sympathize with all of them. And I tell them that I understand that, what they're doing is what they have to do, and that you have to follow what you have to do. But here are some other choices maybe that you haven't considered. Or, you really have all this talent. You have all this great potential. And, over here, just a little, just over on this side, that potential could blossom in this area or that area. So you're basically giving them the, pep talk about their ability and their capabilities, as well as giving them options of how else could they look at the world? How else could they look at this problem? Is there any other way to view it? And that kind of thing. But always not from telling them what to do, but always from just like you're the friend, just trying to help them out. You don't have a dog in the fight. You're not trying to convince them of anything. You just are that friend that's giving them a little advice. But the power of it is that they hear that as an internal dialogue, mostly. Now, if they're very sensitive, if I did that to you folks, you'd probably say, Tom, what are you doing in my head? But most people don't do that. Most people just get the telepathic message, the content, and they get the feeling, they get the sense of it. And from their perspective, it's their thought. They thought of it. They have this idea that maybe there's something else they could do, or maybe there's this potential that they haven't really worked on yet, or something else that they could be and become. And that's the reason it's so powerful. It's theirs. It's not yours. And when it's theirs, then it's a much more powerful place than it is if it's yours and you're explaining this to them. So that's how it works. You just go to that point consciousness place and just have a conversation with them. But because it's telepathic, when you speak telepathically, which is the normal way of communicating in the non-physical, you need clear, simple ideas. If you get too complex and your ideas jump around a lot, you'll confuse people. You have to have simple, clear thoughts, and you have to do it slowly, and you have to be concise, so you say exactly what you mean. You have to be careful that you don't say things that would confuse them, because they're just getting it. And if you confuse them because they don't know how you mean it, this could be interpreted this way or that way, well, then you lost it. So you have to be very careful how you speak. Slow, very matter of fact, not a lot of extras thrown in, just the ideas. You just want them to have the concept. You don't really want to give them a speech. You just want to give them the salient points that they need to have, and do those clearly and slowly. And almost always I found it works very, very well.
That's really great, Tom.
Yeah.
Along the lines of what Hillary had said earlier about clearing oneself and working on oneself to be open and clear, you were talking about parts of us going in a virtual way to communicate and assist, help somebody. And I actually don't know that I do that, but I've had people say to me, you came to me in a dream. I heard you showed up and said, do this. And well, not necessarily telling them what to do, but encouraging them. I heard you. I felt you. So is that a part of us that how do we do that as far as intention is concerned? Okay. You just mentioned a certain way to do it, but how about not putting it on our list of things to do at night? So we have something else to do, but then we do work with that person to have an intention. So is it split? Do we split ourselves off? Do we allow it? What do we do?
Okay. That's sort of another thing that you can do. And I mentioned that with Laurie, is have this intention. Yes. I use this with people who I expect are going to be having problems. That there are people who have problems that need my help, and when they have their problem, an attack of some sort, be it a panic or whether it's non-physical beings or whatever, but they may be living in the other side of the world. They may be in Australia or some other place. So, I'm going to be asleep. I'm going to be doing other things while they need me. So I set up an intention, and I tell them, call my name, and I will be there. And then I set up a logical intention in my consciousness that says, whenever, Susie calls, go and meet her needs, give her the information or the help, or if sometimes it's trouble with non-physical entities kind of thing. If there's a trouble, then, whatever it is she needs, help her out. And I find that it always works. I will hear back from them, and they will say that, yes, they got this problem and they needed some immediate relief, and they called and they got help and it worked fine. Thank you very much. So it will always work. And what happens is that it's a part of you. You're a multidimensional being. You're not just, what's in your intellect and that awareness. You're more than that. So if you set up an intent, and now that intent has to be in your mind. You can't an intention is something that you have to put there, but it still has to be a part of you. If you just put it there and then forget about it, well, then it goes away because you're no longer giving it any energy or any force. So you put the intent there, and you have to maintain that intent. Now that sounds like you have to keep thinking about it all the time, but you don't. You get good at being aware of it without actually putting any intellectual energy in it. So you just know that intent is there, and you want to maintain that for as long as, say, that person's traveling in, Africa or someplace. Mm-hmm. So you set the intent, and then when they call, you'll be there, and they will perhaps see you. They will get the message, or you will solve their problem. Again, if their problem is that they're being annoyed or bothered by some non-physical entity of some sort, then you can deal with that as well. You will deal with that entity. And this intention of you, it is you, it's a part of you, and it'll act just like you, sound like you, look like you, do the exact same kind of things, tactics, approaches that you have, because it's really you. You don't have to be consciously aware to do that, but you do have to set up the intent and maintain the intent to do that. And that's what I told Laura. She could set up an intent such that whenever this person had a fear attack coming on, she would be there, give them a big hug, lots of love, walk away. You can deal with this. You can choose to react differently. And then it would just automatically happen, even if Laurie was in a conversation or fixing dinner or, watching a movie or doing something else, it would work just as well. So that's a way you can kind of duplicate yourself, if you will, and set up a specific intent that automatically will trigger. And you just set that up with consciousness. Consciousness is an information system. You can set up conditionals, an if-then statement, if this happens, then do that. And it will execute those statements without you being there. A little practice, you'll get better at it. You'll see that it works. Now, the other reason that people sometimes say, you came to me in a dream, is that they're interpreting. A dream is also a data stream, and they have to, they interpret that data. And if their interpretation is that it was you, you don't necessarily have anything to do with it. That's just their interpretation. And it's because it fits something that seems like you to them. That's why they would have that. I get that a lot from people. Tom, you were in my dream last night. So that's the other thing that can happen, but you can work that both ways.
Well, this was fun. This was great. Anything else anyone wants to add?
I'm good. Loved it.
We're good. All right.
Loved it.
Thank you all again very much.